Here with the pal again, Isaac Morehouse, versus me just kind of taking over last week from Supernote. If you didn't catch that episode, it was lots of fun. And then we got our buddy here, Braydan Young, for his second appearance. What's up, Braydan? Welcome to PartnerUp.
Second appearance. Good to be here.
Yeah, Jared,
Yes.
I don't have a hat on.
Jared, you accused me of being more prepared than you've ever seen me for this show. But the truth is, I usually scratch out some bullet points of ideas, of topics, questions, and I usually just don't share them with you. And I was like, well, why don't I share them with Jared? Because then we end up we both repeat. And so I shared them, and you're like, whoa, look at all this preparation. So now I'm concerned about my reputation. It was like, prior to this, what did you think I was doing? Just showing up drunk,
Just showing up and just talking for a while.
I mean, that works too. Braydan, the last time you were on the show, of course, I was not here at that time. It was, I looked at the date. It was like 10 months ago. And the title was about your title. The title of the show was about your title of Chief Partner Officer. And you said you hope this started a trend. You hope it would catch on. Well, it has, at least in one place, because sitting before you is the Chief Ecosystem Officer of Partner Hacker in Jared Fuller right here.
I think ecosystem's a way better term than just chief partner. I think that just sounds better, because you get like the CEO as the acronym, which is just far superior to CPO.
This is how Isaac and I make decisions. We have general guardrails of like how we operate, like what would and what wouldn't be okay. It's like Braydan, you get it working with Chris, like being co-founders, like it either works or it doesn't. Like if you really have to really work, it's like there's commitments and stuff, but then there's like, the 90% where it's like, that's just easy. This is one of those things where like, I just put it on a presentation, like my keynote at Supernote, and Isaac's like, oh, I guess that's Jared's title now.
There's like, so in Slack internally, it still says like Braydan Young, just I build desks and order laptops, because that's what I did for the first like 2 or 3 years we were in business. Was I would order like 10 desks at a time from IKEA and build those, and then on the first day of hire, it would be like, we're walking to the Apple store and buying you a laptop. So and it's still in there because I just haven't changed it.
Desk assembly is like an underappreciated. I went through this with myself to a smaller scale, but and I was helping my brother at his company when they went from like 20 to 200 employees over a very short period. They had basically like this company Automatic. At the time, I think it was just a Kickstarter, but now it's like a full-blown company. And they have the sit-to-stand desks. And it was like his chief of staff at one point, literally all he did was assemble desks. It was just desk assembly, getting rid of the cardboard from the shipping containers. It's a underappreciated.
And you have product market fit when you're IKEA and you order like 20 desks and like 18 show up, and you're like, who do I go to tell them they're missing 2 desks? It's like, call this number. Like no one answers ever, and you're like, what am I supposed to do? And then like a year goes by and you order more from IKEA because you're like, I don't know where else to go to get these things, and so you just keep going back to the same place to pay $180 for a desk, and just they're like, yeah, it's your only choice.
I feel like a great deal of discomfort if part of your onboarding plan at the company that I'm at in your first day is not assembling your own desk. Like I'm like, the company's gotten too big. If that's not in your first day task of like, I haven't felt comfortable since that's been the case, where it's like, okay, there's a new employee starting. All right, they're building their own desk, right? They're not. Who? Wait a second. Who are we paying to build that person's desk?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's like once the onboarding moves on from like, oh, like, so your first day, you're just going to shadow all day. Because it sounds super like, oh, what does that mean? Basically, just look at my calendar and jump on any call you see, and I'll just introduce you. And that's onboarding. And after that, for a couple hours, you're off to the races.
I like it.
Totally.
What you guys ended your last convo, so I figured we should follow up on this. And Jared said, oh, we're going to have you back on to see how your partner operating model played out. So can we get an update from where things were left almost a year ago? You were kind of like, hey, this is sort of experimental. Don't know what's going to happen. Catch us up to speed.
Yeah. So we grew it out a lot. So what we found was that we were having a lot of conversations with companies that were like, "Hey, like can we get your API?" Or like we have an API, can you build an integration towards us, or vice versa? And our conversations went technical really fast. So we had this guy that I worked with. His name was Francois, and we ended up moving him over to the product team because he understood the API side, and he was spending his entire day chatting with a new integration we would build, why it was important, why would it pull in more leads, why the sales team wanted it. And so it just made more sense to have him be like our advocate on the product side to help influence the roadmap. So like that happened, which was new. We also hired someone new to help
Brayden,
on.
real quick, I want to
Yeah,
pause you there
yeah.
because the importance in like like an ecosystem maturity kind of model, like having that be a dedicated product function. Was that the first partnerships dedicated function in product, or was that just specific to this?
That was the first one dedicated and well, I mean, because like we had it was all kind of mixed up. So you had like a product
Right.
roadmap where you were working on an integration. You might be like, we're gonna plug into Salesforce, and Salesforce is like, that's cool, we don't care. But like it's a little different when you're like, oh, we're gonna plug into a smaller company that we know we can go and joint sell together. And so
Yeah.
like that was an actual real partnership. And so you took a little more influence with the product team to convince them why this needed to be on the roadmap. And like we could have meetings, and but once we had like an advocate there, it was better than just like going to the product team every time and talking to the integration team being like, we really want to plug into X because it's going to bring us a lot of deals. They're like, well, I have Salesforce to do and Dynamics to do and all those things, like I'll get those done and then I'll move on to that one. So it was like, how can we make this just more fluid to make it easier for companies to plug into us and have somebody who's actually on the product team who can actually represent us on the roadmap and the meetings that partnerships can't be in.
Okay, I'm about to go off right here. First off, great job. Like everyone listening, let's give Sendoso and Brayden a round of applause because I love that
Oh,
story.
wow.
I absolutely love that story because I was just going off earlier today on Adam Michalski's podcast about how if anyone hires like a head of partner right now and like they're siloed only into like the CRO, I can tell you for a fact that you've made the wrong hire. Why? Because that thing that you just talked about, that's never gonna, it's so hard to make sales have like a corollary dedicated headcount inside of product. Like, no, but it's very common for partner. And I think that's something like where you're like, oh man, I'm siloed in sales as a partner leader. That's why you really have to advocate to get out and get wider to be able to touch product as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I think in product they're not in those conversations, and so
Exactly.
if you're having a conversation with whoever it might be, and they're like, "Hey, we're asked about all the time about how we can do gifting, and you guys would plug it in perfectly here." Like you give that to product, and product's like, "Okay, I'm getting this ask, and I'm getting an ask to improve my Salesforce integration." Like most of our customers, like you get on a tier list pretty fast, and like you're not in those meetings that typically have the conversation there, and yes, you have to barter and trade and figure out times and like make sure that it actually is because we built integrations that haven't gone anywhere. But I think that like you have to have somebody there, which we learned pretty quickly. Well,
I've
actually, not
seen
quickly. It
the
took too long
past
to
two
get there.
companies. That's when I knew I'm like, okay, you please fire me now, please fire me. Was whenever there was fully dedicated product and integration teams. I'm like, my work here is done.
Yeah,
My work here is done. Like that's such an amazing milestone for any great SaaS company is to like be able to have that. You start to have it dedicated, at least have that PM, that advocate that's kind of making sure there's more communal tacit knowledge amongst the rest of the org, and then boom, it becomes so much easier to forecast and stack resources behind as a like a team. I love it,
yeah.
man.
Oh yeah, I mean, and then also like that team's much better at data than we were, so they can look at things like, hey, we've lost X number of deals because we don't have a Dynamics integration. Like, and we
Right.
push that up on the roadmap to get that done. So that was one side of it. The other side of it was we brought a guy named Corey Snyder in, who's just running our agency side because we messed up with agencies the first round. Like we thought to ourselves, like we'll bring on as many as possible and we'll ask for referrals, and then like we'll won't give anything back to them. And like that was like the model, and like it didn't. Like they were like, "Cool, like you haven't brought me any deals. Like why would I bring you deals?" And so the thought there now is like, how can we make it more of a two-way street? So it's like, hey, like you're putting Sendoso in place. The agency is going to help do that, and they're going to be able to use billable hours to basically run Sendoso for the company they're working for. And like we didn't have good training there or enablement, so Corey's done an amazing job to kind of build that out as a new motion for us because agencies have a ton of influence and power, and we just
His present SaaS Connect on how to do this quickly was awesome.
good,
By the way,
yeah.
like watching it live and just kind of like, hey, here's how to stand this up quickly. I thought Corey in terms of like, here's the 90-day plan to stand up like something quick,
Yeah.
right? And like get moving and like move that agency program. I thought that was one of the best examples I'd seen. And so shout out Corey.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that like and then we moved the entire team where we were under marketing. We moved it to now we're just under Chris, who's my co-founder and CEO, because it made more sense.
Brandon,
I get it.
Yeah,
Brayden
it works.
somehow.
I was about to
Yeah,
give Isaac a
yeah,
compliment
yeah,
because how he kicked this off was like, in the last episode, here's exactly how you ended. And
yeah.
like that was such a well researched question, Isaac, and you did such a good
Hey,
job.
watch the
And
last
then you
podcast.
mispronounced the guest's name.
Well, I also flubbed up by not wearing my Sendoso hat today.
I wasn't gonna
I
say anything,
totally
That's
intended
all right.
to.
Yeah.
I totally
It's a
did.
good dad hat.
But I want to zoom out and talk a little bit more about the category that Sendoso's in, because I find this to be really interesting. So we have this Sunday story, and when this episode airs, I think the story about Sendoso and the category you're playing in will have just dropped. So definitely go check that out on partnerhacker.com. But the sending economy, and maybe that's nested in something broader. Maybe that's like a subset of the attention economy, right? The battle for attention, and sending and gifting, I think, is maybe a subset of that. I want to sort of just start from a very high level. Like, why is sending so powerful, and how did you discover that?
I think so. It wouldn't, maybe you could put it under the umbrella of trying to get attention, but there's only a handful of ways you can get in front of a customer or a prospect or an employee. So there's email, which we've used since the 70s. There's phone call, which is even older than that. And then there's every day when I walk to my mailbox and I grab something, or when FedEx shows up and they drop something off on my front porch. And most companies have used the mail like throughout the years, like with postcards, with things that weren't targeted. So like I would get something and like I'd be like, who sent me this? Or maybe you get a postcard and you're like, I don't even know what, like, my window's cleaned. And so like I think that mail's been around forever, but the two things that haven't been done within mail is like, one, it hasn't been super super personalized, and it hasn't been tracked. So the big thing is like, if I receive something and someone's trying to sell me, do I go to the website after? Do I go and download a case study after? And so like I think like that's where the epiphany went off, where like I've always sent things out, I've never tracked this. How can we make it easy for companies who want to track physical mail? The other side of it, with the sending world or sending ecosystem, is trying to build a relationship with a prospect or with an employee or a vendor. And no matter what you say, I think gifting is insanely powerful. It brings the power of reciprocity into it, and it helps to build a relationship, as you can't always see that person face to face, or he can't always see them once a year. And I think like that alone helps companies really figure out, like, like who they're close with and like who they want to sell with. I think especially right now, like with the economy we're in, a lot of companies are looking to make cuts. So like, hey, like what software can I cut? And if I'm very close to a certain customer, it's a bit harder to cut me because I have a relationship there. And so I think it's an important thing, especially right now in the day and age we're in.
Man, one of the things that I find so interesting about it is like, I always liked it. And I think we've talked about this on this show before, Jared. I always think in sort of like economic terms, the concept of costly signals, which is something also in nature, right? The idea of like a deer with huge antlers. It's really inefficient, but it's a way to signal how fit the deer is, right? If he can survive lugging these things around, then he must be pretty strong, and that's how they attract mates. And this happens in all kinds of areas of the economy, right? Like back in the day, this is why banks would have marble floors to signal, hey, we're here to stay. We're not going to take your money and run. We've invested in this infrastructure, right? So like a costly signal, you've invested something up front, which means I know if it was worth it for you to put in the time and energy to do this, there's more to back up what you're saying versus just telling me our product's great, buy our product, right? That's easy, that's cheap. So like I'm very fascinated in this, and especially in this sort of like marriage of the benefits of the digital world where information can be proliferated so cheap, right? It's almost free. And so that's great. It has all kinds of advantages, digitization, automation, massive scale, and all kinds of efficiencies. But the value, it's so cheap now that like you have to find a way to convey that you're in it for the long haul. You have to find costly signals. And I think that this combination of like physical gifts, especially. I know you guys do a lot of e-gifts as well, and I want to ask you about kind of the relative effectiveness of those, but of like the old school physical gift combined with the trackability, the traceability, the systemization and scale of a CRM, there's just kind of like a little bit of magic there, I think. Of like it's like the best of the human and the digital. It's like Iron Man, right? He's still a guy, but he's amplified by technology. It's not like the horrible story of technology drowning us all out and we're all getting tired and overwhelmed with it. This is like the combination in some way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like, yes, I think a lot of the time, and before I typically hop on like a demo with a sales rep, I'll usually go to whatever that company is and I'll request a demo because I want to see like what the experience is with me just going in. Like, I'll use like my Gmail address, which a lot of executives do, and so I'll just see like what that experience is, and so like that right away triggers like when I begin to interact with that brand. So I want to see like what the email is that I get. How long does it take to have someone follow up with me? Like if I get an email saying, "Hey, like pick a time, use this calendar link," and I'm like, "Okay, like I guess I can do that." But like, are they going to send me like an e-gift for coffee like while I'm doing it? Like, hey, like awesome, you picked a demo. It's next week on Wednesday. In the meantime, here's a case study you should read, and here's a coffee to Starbucks you can enjoy while you essentially get ready for this demo. So there's so many things you're trying to do with your interacting with a brand that are digital. Or and then like most of my life, most of all our lives are posted on social. Like LinkedIn and Facebook, I have a very thin line between them now. So because I'm posting those things, you kind of get a sense around like, hey, I just got back from pat leave. I might be into certain things. And so like you can use that to begin to build a relationship right off the bat as an AE or as an SDR, which I think is very important in the world that we live in because I don't want to buy from a robot. If I'm having a conversation with a demo and it's a half an hour conversation, I want to have a relationship with that person, especially if I take a second phone call. So I think like, that kind of just takes it even further in terms of how you're interacting with the brand.
We you froze for just a second there at the end. I think it will probably
Oh man.
come through okay
Okay.
on the final recording. But
Yeah.
um, do you what do you see? I'm really curious about this. I know the physical is probably some of the impacts of the physical side. The physical gifts are harder to quantify and measure. But what do you see in the difference? So like coffee gift cards that somebody gets emailed versus a hat or some muffins or something physical that shows up. Like what are the big differences there, and where is one more effective and where is the other more effective?
I think it's all about timing. So if and it's all about the things you're sending. So like sending sporadic random things is not the best way to use a platform like ours or any of our competitors. Like the best way to use a platform like ours is there's a certain flow that you might be having with the customer. So if it's a demo plan, like I think it's a good spot for an e-gift. If it's a contract sent, I think it's another good spot for an e-gift. If I talked about on a phone call how I love the 49ers are the best thing on the planet. I'm going to the game this Sunday. I know it's not football season, but like, hey, like, let's say like that's, what's going on. That's a perfect idea for something physical. To be like, hey, like have a good time at the game, etc. If I just had a kid, like that's something I could, if I'm a customer already, I could send something. So there has to be a good reason like why you send something. I send hats. I send a lot of them because they're very simple things to send with a handwritten note, and typically I do them after phone calls, just so you kind of remember me. Like, hey, like I had a good time talking to Braydan. He gave me a hat, even if it's not worn. It's something that's a nice hat. Another thing to look at is like maybe this person's very into sustainability and you probably want to do something that's a little more on the green side. Like, could you send something and carbon offset it? Could you do a charity type thing? So I think there's tons of different reasons why you want to send, but doing things just to do things is not the best way to do it. It's good to keep it structured as to where you are in the flow of the customer. If it's an HR send, it's like, hey, what's going on with that employee? So I think those are important things to keep in mind.
I heard you talking smack about conference swag last time we chatted. Tell me why conference swag is usually like what works and what doesn't work there, right? Like is it usually just a waste?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like it's your brand and your logo, and putting that on something that's like a cheap plastic thing. Even though we did that for so long, I would say that today we're in a different time, and that's not something that you should do unless it matches your like putting your logo on a squeeze ball at a conference. I mean, like those just get thrown away. So like, how can you do something that's a little more sustainable at a conference? Like, why not have a swag store set up at your booth where someone wants something, you can collect their email address, and then when they go home a week later, a package shows up. Like, that's a killer follow up. Or like if you're handing something out there, like if they're pens or things like that, like maybe. But I think the idea of giving out cheap plastic things at conferences need to go away. I just think it's unsustainable, and I'm not a fan of it when it comes to the world of people walking away with gigantic swag bags and then going back to their hotel room and figuring out what they want and don't want, and the same, some things make it in a suitcase, some things don't. So I just think,
So the
yeah,
way it goes for me is I grab some random stuff because when I get home, I know my kids are going to be like, "How come you never take us on your trips? How come you have all this fun?" I'm like, "Okay, well, you wouldn't have had fun, trust me.
yeah. Here's
Um,
some chapstick.
here's some swag, right?" And I and I get like a frisbee or whatever, and then within like a couple days, I'm sweeping it up off of their floor and throwing it in the in the garbage. But
Yeah,
it something to but I love that
Gosh,
idea you mentioned of having a store. That's so brilliant. The personalization of like, let's say you have your booth and you're like, hey, sign up and pick out which coffee roast you want us to send you when you get home, or something, and that way you kind of have this ability, and you feel like, I mean, if I went to a booth and they had that, I'm literally like shopping on an iPad at their booth, I would feel like, oh my gosh, if I'm gonna like make them send me something, I at least owe them a conversation or my contact information, versus just grabbing a handful of candy and running.
yeah. It's funny. When we weren't good about this in the past, but we've seen it more and more. And like big companies like Facebook did this forever ago, and my wife was there. Is they used to not put their logo on swag, or if they did, it was really small. And so so they'd be like, hey, like here's like a North Face jacket, which I happen to be wearing with the massive logo, but here's one where the logo's like on the wrist and it just says like FB right here. And I always remember when I used to see those, I was like, that's weird. Like, why would they not want to have their logo all over it? It's because for HR sends, employees don't really want that. Like they just want like and so I think like that's kind of a cool thing we're seeing in the space where that happens more and more, where especially for internal type sends, which is kind of interesting. Like the big branded shirts with the huge massive logo that no one knows what it is outside of the tech bubble we live in is kind of going away, which I think is kind of a good thing because I feel like a lot of those are wasted sometimes.
Well, it's funny. I know, Jared, you're chomping at the bit, but I have to get in this quick story because Brayden made me think of it. Uh, so long ago, I used to work in the state legislature in Michigan. I was like a legislative aide, and I was working for a guy who just happened to become the chairman of the appropriations committee when I was working for him. So now suddenly, it's budget season. And so I was like, kind of like managing the schedules and stuff for everybody on the higher education subcommittee during the time of year when they're deciding how much money these public universities are going to get from the state that year. And so I'm basically like just this aide, like scheduler or whatever, just grunt work stuff. And I had just started this job, and my wife was going to have our first child, and so I was out for like a couple weeks. When I came back, on my desk there was 15 gift bags, all little gift bags there, from lobbyists representing each of the 15 public universities. I don't know if all 15 of them, but almost like 12 or 13 of them. And they all had, and I didn't even know any of these lobbyists. I didn't know that they knew me or knew my name, let alone that my wife was having a child, let alone that it was a boy. And somehow they had figured all this out. And but here's where it went wrong, right? They all had like little onesies from like, Northern Michigan University, Eastern Michigan University, University whatever. But this is college logos. I'm a big Michigan State Spartans fan. I'm not putting my kid in a Wolverines onesie. Like this isn't going to work on me. If anything, it felt a little creepy, and it was like, well, we're not going to use that. Why would I want that? So it was like they. On the one hand, I was flattered. I felt like I was a big deal. On the other hand, it was like the gift just missed the mark. So anyway, I thought I
Yeah,
thought
I
that was
mean, a way better send to be like, hey, here's $50 to that restaurant next to your house. Take your what? Like, go out and
right.
like grab a dinner when the kid goes to sleep.
Right. I had just had a kid. I think I
Yeah,
was making $40,000 a
yeah,
year or something, 35. So yeah, I would have flipped out over a $5 gift card.
yeah, man.
not hitting the right place at the right time. It's particularly evident, and I think it's I was gonna jump in about some of the stuff we saw at Drift. DC and ET over at Drift, they have the best swag game on the planet. Like every time DC would give a talk, there would inevitably be like a dozen or dozens of people, I'm not kidding, after the talk talking to him about his attire, his kicks, his sneaks, like his jackets, like that. He had these custom like drift jackets that looked like they looked like, I mean, $2,000 or $3,000 jackets. Not like a Patagonia, but like these custom design things that were
Yeah.
like one offs. That was only for the founders. And it was like, what a weird approach. But then everyone was trying to get stuff like that. So like the one-off special DC or ET edition pieces of swag. I mean, Drift would announce like, "Hey, we have 50 of these," and there'd immediately be 50 comments on the LinkedIn post within 4 minutes.
It's a good approach. I mean, it's kind of like the what's that store called? Like the 100s, where there's like 100 of something produced, and like that's it. And like, or
Right.
like when like or people when they join companies and they have like the what like number employee they were, like those ones. I think that like that's an interesting approach where it's like, hey, like these are more exclusive because I value you and like we're building a relationship there. I think that's important for internal and
Well,
external.
and you can, with that exclusivity, you can sort of, it's like a marketing hack too, right? Where so with my previous company Crash, when we first got started, um, we called them founding crashers. We had gone out and recruited like 100 people to be beta testers of the of the thing, and to do various things for us. And but we basically used that as like a hype machine, right? So we sent each of them a little box, like a custom box, and it had like we were doing video resumes. So I had a box of matches in there that said "Burn your resume." We might have broken some laws sending matches by U.S. mail, but don't come at me.
I'm sure there's worse
But
things in the U.S. mail.
but we also sent one of those boxes to each of our investors. And you
Yep.
know how investors often are like, yeah, we're gonna do all this value add stuff. And like most of the time, especially at a very early stage company like ours, they're not doing very much. And at the very early stages that we were in, they're not out there even publicly bragging about you yet, because they're like, okay, we just gave you a seed round. You have to prove something. I don't want to go out here and use my limited amount of tweets or LinkedIn or whatever talking about a company that's so early they haven't proven anything yet. But we sent this swag box, and what we did was we added detention slips, because our whole thing was like, break the rules, don't follow the guidelines, like, pitch yourself into roles. And so we would add these detention slips that would say like, you're in detention for blah blah blah, like breaking stuff, and we would customize them to like each person. So we did this for these investors, and like 3 or 4 of them all did amazing tweets or LinkedIn posts with a picture of this box, because they were like, oh my gosh, look what I just received from our portfolio company Crash. And they hyped us up. And they would not have done that if I just said, will you go hype us up? They wouldn't do it. Like, we couldn't ask them for it. So instead, we gave them something tailored and unique to them that was just, created this kind of cascading effect of organic fan marketing, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the best sends I think we've ever done, and it was actually internal. We've done it a couple times. Or like we send things that someone can do with their family, because like you're almost it's like an interesting line there. Like you're not trying to sell them. You're just like, hey, like this is a donut making kit. Like when you like this weekend, like if you get a chance, you wake up early on Sunday morning, you can make donuts with your kids and your family, and like if you happen to take a picture, that's awesome. So I think that like that was one of those things where you're sort of like slowly influencing them, and like you're having them where they want to spend time, because people don't want to spend time on virtual happy hours. People don't want to spend time on virtual or whatever like the demo might be. I think that like when you're slowly influencing that was we've seen that work really well. Companies that use us or use anybody that really know their brand well do the best. Like we've had like companies that sell to advertising people, or like ad agencies, and like the sends that they do, there's no selling. It's just a really badass send that like looks amazing. They send it, it arrives, and the notes like just has their logo on it. It's like just logo. It's like not they're not even like selling. It's just like, isn't this cool? And you're like, oh, what? Like I want to know more about this. Like that does the trick, rather than any like marketing email or follow up or whatever have you.
So this is something I'm curious your thoughts on, because I don't really like have an answer. There's 2 principles here that maybe on the surface seem contradictory, but I don't think they are. We've been talking about this, an ecosystem approach, a partnership approach. One of the reasons that's so effective is it allows you to work within the patterns that people are already engaging in their daily lives. People have their patterns, their routines, their habits. And if your product can seamlessly integrate with the existing patterns and not ask them to break their pattern and go do something new, it wins. And I even heard you talking about this in your last episode with Jared, that hey, you look how many people are using Sendoso through Salesforce, and you want that to be a lot because they're living in Salesforce. It's a part of their pattern, it's a part of their everyday. So working with the natural patterns that people are in, huge win. But on the flip side, there's something going on here where like what Sendoso does, sends and gifts, one of the reasons it works is because it disrupts the pattern, because it surprises someone. It breaks from the norm that they're used to. They get a donut making kit in the mail, and that kind of like breaks the pattern of this is how you work with someone, this is what it's like to be a customer of someone or whatever. So I'm just, there's something interesting in there where it's like this combination of understanding and working with patterns, not asking people to do more work than they need to or than they're used to, but then disrupting patterns. And maybe the difference is the disruption doesn't ask anything of them, it gives them something to them. So maybe if you're making an ask of somebody, you want that ask to work with their natural patterns. And if you're going to give somebody something, give in such a way that breaks from it. Like just sending an email thank you is maybe not enough of a break from what they're used to. I don't know. I've just been something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I think that, well, there's, to answer the first part of that question, there you see a new company every month decide that they're going to be the new platform of record, and they're going to have everybody plug into them, and they're going to have every app that's out there be, and like, it's not everyone can be a platform, and if everyone's trying to be a platform, I think that makes it a very hard thing, like who gets the most time in their systems. So our approach there is like, hey, let's just plug into whoever's trying to be the platform of record so we can just live there and make sending really, really easy. So like that's kind of the first part. The second part of your question is like to kind of disrupt it. I think that like the biggest thing, and people look at sending as something that's only done on the sales side, and I would argue that it should be, and it is on a lot on the sales side, but I would argue more that it needs to be done post sale. So like once you've kind of established that relationship with that customer, like that's when you should start sending like even more, because there's things that happen. There's every time you're interacting with that customer or with that partner, there should be a good excuse to send something super, super small, or as people go through life events. And so I think like that's important to incorporate into like that post sending. And maybe it's not just the pattern, but maybe it's just it's make it easy to send. There's I always relate this to like sending, and I've always been bad about this, like sending your grandma like a handwritten note. Like I was like, or like a handwritten thank you note. Like I was always really, really bad at it. But whenever I did it, I would get a phone call like thanking me, and I'm like, shit, I should do that more often. And like it's one of those things where like it was one of those things like if I did that all the time, like I would get a phone call every time. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that sometimes it's a pain in the ass to do the send, to walk out of the platform, but if we're living there, it's easy to send. It's automated. I think like that's important to have that live in each platform, just make sending really simple to help kind of elevate that relationship.
That's such a good point about the retention or ongoing relationship component. Like, obviously, it's not done once you made the sale, but also the effectiveness. There's probably like a discount I'm going to give if you send me a gift while you're trying to close me. I'm going to be like, okay, that's nice. It's probably it's going to help, but I'll also be like, I know what you're trying to do, right? I know what you're trying to do. But whereas if I'm already your customer and you just send me one for a holiday or a birthday,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, they're not even getting anything from this. I'm already a customer. Wow, I love these guys.
I mean, I've sold Jared, I think, at 3 companies. And I think, but like the goal there is like it's a relationship versus like, hey, what you're actually buying, which I think is important to keep that in mind. Like it's not, hey, I'm buying Sendoso. It's like, oh, I should talk to Braydan because I need to do some sending. It's like that's the point you want to get to. And like I like Jared, he might not like me, but at least it's one of those points where it's at least like it's at least there where like it's important to have that in mind.
I'll say that I there's a respect there because going all the way back to the second phase of our history. I know we met each other when we were in HR tech, but whenever you had, it was Coffee Sender. Was
Yeah.
Coffee Sender you and Chris at the time?
Yeah,
Same
it
same
was.
thing. Okay, so it was you and Chris had Coffee Sender, and Brittany and I were about to build Swagbot,
Yeah.
and then you guys pivoted to Sendoso full time, and that I actually read Giftology around that same time,
Where the dude did
which
knives and suits and stuff.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
but like like it's all for his funnel, right? To like book a
Yeah.
strategy group, right? It's like he's trying to get his Fortune 500 customers. So this is how he monetized the downstream. Like Like this is the guy that like convinced the Chicago Cubs to send one of the seats from the stadium to their season ticket holders, right? Like they got a seat. Like you
Yeah.
can bet your ass they are buying season tickets next year, like a guaranteed. They have a piece of Chicago, history right there, and like that's a centerpiece of the house, and it gets referenced again and again and again in the house by the kids, by the wife. And then that's when I realized, kind of tying together Isaac and Brayden, what you were saying was like, I think the best gifts are ones that both they pattern interrupt, but then they become a part of your culture. So the knife guy, right? Like if you bought, think about it, you can spend like on a solid knife set like $1,000,
Oh
which
yeah.
blows my mind. I've never gone over like the $100, Pottery Barn version, right? Or Walmart or Costco, actually, to be honest, probably. Um, like that's it. But if I had like $1,000 knife set, man, I would use that all the time as I'm like cooking and whatever. And every time I do it, I'm thinking of that person. So like his example is like it's almost like trite, but like wow, if you can really hit, so like for big partnerships, right? You're doing something big with another company, like we're talking an alliance, like $1 million thing, a
Yeah.
multi-million-dollar thing. I wonder, like, where are some of those examples?
Like the very big sense.
Yeah, like the stuff that's like helps us contextualize. Like, okay, here's the here's how to do everyday stuff better, and then here's how to like know when to do something. Oh, we need to go like that. It was like the drift experience. Like whenever we would do something, like we bought our CFO like a signed photograph of like the 18th hole of a famous course by like a famous golfer, and it was like a $5,000 thing,
Yeah.
right?
So
Like,
like
whoa, like
So it's
everyone
almost
in
like
the office was talking
once
about it. It blew up on
gifting.
social media. Like the small things, but there's also the big things that I feel like can have like a outsized impact.
absolutely. I think there's a couple things. So like one, like on the recruiting side, we've done things where we've sent kayaks, where we've sent like surfboards to
Yeah,
people because we knew that like they would relate to that, where we put our logo on it, like it would be a really big send to somebody. So like we've done that. Absolutely. I think there's like we're pumped on this Goldbelly integration because like we sent like long time ago, we were trying to get into SAP, and we sent this guy that was in like Kansas City, like probably $1,000 worth of like barbecue out of like Austin, and like it was just like this like and like it was massive, but like that got the reaction we wanted, and like all of a sudden now he was an advocate for us because he was like, how do you guys know this? They're like, oh, you told us at a conference that you're obsessed with barbecue. Like we ended up sending him a barbecue also, like a Traeger grill. I think there's things like that that
yes,
are like
exactly,
that
exactly. That's what I mean.
like
Like those.
those things, but like he's a massive advocate for us. I think like those like that's the sort of stuff that like if you know for a fact like this is going to get the reaction that I want, and this is like my exact person that I know this needs to happen, then I think that like those big sends should 100% happen. Like whatever that might be. I mean, I'm trying to think some of the random sends. We sent tires. We sent like a whole new set of tires to somebody once, which was kind of hilarious.
Wow, tires.
Yeah.
Well, actually, do you remember 2 years ago? It was like there was that giant heat wave in the UK.
Hmm.
You remember that? It was like it was bad. It was like in the 90s, and
Hit
no
away in
one
the
had any
fountains.
AC.
Yeah.
We sent one of our biggest clients an air conditioner from Drift, like
Yeah.
legit, and they were like the family changed their summer, their lives. Like it was a big deal, and I was like, wow, I can't. The fact that the CSM had that idea and was like, we should send this customer an AC. Like I'm on the Zoom calls with them. Like they're trying to run a business from their house. Like this is a really bad situation. The fact that she escalated that and the VP of CS immediately was like, done, let's do it.
It's like the cult, like a sending culture, right?
Yeah, like that mentality, like a partnerships. I don't know. It feels related to me. Like that's why I could
Yeah.
geek out
Absolutely.
about this. Is like it really does feel like a more genuine connection.
Well, and like the most unique stuff are the fun ones. I mean, we found a company that you could send snow through. So like you could send snow from like Montana to like people in LA that were like it was like and it was one of those things where like those are the fun ones. Like we might not always find them, but I think that like if a company is like, hey, we want to do this super unique thing, if it's possible, if it's scalable, and I think it's something that like you should send and track. I think that is the biggest caveat there is you want to make sure it gets the reaction you want and it's not way overboard where you're like, why is this person sending me a Jerry Rice signed like
We
like
could do a segment when sending goes south in hand,
yeah.
like
Well, like there's been like ones where like you send the wrong thing. I think that like there's like alcohol is a good example. Like you send like a super expensive bottle of something to somebody and they're like, I don't drink. Like I think you gotta like
Like
those
I've
ones
been
you gotta be
sober for
careful of.
8 years. Like,
So
why would you send
Yeah.
that to me?
so,
Like,
Yeah.
so one time I was working at this organization and this guy applied to to work there, and I mean, to his credit, he went above and beyond. He came up with something clever, and we all talked about it for sure. But he, after the interview, he sent he sent to the person he had interviewed with. It was like this little box, and she opened it, and it had a little shoe in it, and it said, I think we're a perfect fit, or something like that. But it was like a baby shoe, and she's like, I have a box with one baby shoe in it. She was like weirded out and creeped out before, because the note was like inside the shoe, and she's like, is this a threat? Why is someone sending me a single baby
did,
shoe?
did they kidnap
And
my
like,
child?
just the whole, he was trying to make an analogy about a good fit or something, but it
oh
just
my
came off
gosh.
as like sort of creepy or weird.
Yeah, yeah. There's those. I mean, like I think that like there's times when it's probably easier just to send just send the littler thing. But I think if
Okay.
it's the right partner and ecosystem, absolutely. I think it's someone who's bringing you into like major deals and they talk about how they're into something all the time. Then I think that it's a good excuse to send somebody something crazy.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry. I have to give this one more story, Jared. It just came to mind because this one, it sounds like it went wrong, but it actually ended up being great. But again, this is in the career space because this is where I worked for all these years. But a friend of mine owns a company, and he's always talking on social media about how he loves going to Chipotle and all this stuff. So
I know who that is.
somebody that wanted to work for him was like, I'm going to have a burrito delivered to him, and in the burrito it's going to have a note that says, check your email, I just sent you a proposal for, I want to come, 30 days, what I'll do when I work for you. So she gets like DoorDash or one of these, and this guy shows up with the burrito, and my friend, he usually works from home, but he was working from somewhere else, and his wife was at home by herself, and they had just had like something stolen or something like that, and she was all on edge. And this kid wearing a black hoodie shows up with a paper bag knocking on the door, and she like freaks out and runs and hides and calls her husband. She's like, someone's at the door. I don't know what they're doing. They won't go away. They keep looking in the windows, because the guy was instructed to make sure that he got the burrito. So he keeps knocking on the door, and she's freaking out. And she's like, he left. He left it on the porch. I don't know if it's like a bomb or something. So like he rushes home, and he's like, I just approached it. I didn't know what was going to be in there, if it was going to be dog poop or what. And he opens it up, and he gets and it all ended up working out great. She got the job, but it could have gone bad. It was a good story. It was worth sharing.
That's Tim. I know who that is.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of those stories that we can tell too around like kind of like the wrong things to send or all that jazz. But I think no matter what it is, like I think the goal is like you kind of have to, especially in the ecosystem, to send it and make sure that relationship continues to be built is important for sure.
Have you ever seen joint gifting between two two partners?
There's kind of two. So, like some of the bigger companies that do really, really well in the channel, they will actually give their channel partners a Sendoso seat, and they'll give them budget. So they'll be like, "Hey, like you get $500 a month to send out like our branded things or send out e-gifts or what have you." That's typically where it works the best. We've done sends with partners a ton of stuff where it's a kit where there might be like two or three things in there. Some are branded by us, some are branded by them for like pre-conference or post-conference. I think those are important. Those tend to work really well, like maybe like post an event or post a conference or so. Like I think that's a good play for sure, especially if you're
I
sending to
love
the
the
right
idea
folks.
of giving a partner a seat, because there's something I found this with employees, right? Like saying, "Oh yeah, you can go to that conference, sure," or "Yeah, sure, we'll buy you a new laptop," is often worth a lot more to them than the equivalent in salary increase, for example. Feeling like they work for a company that's generous, that lets them, that gets them nice tools or sends them to conferences. And there's something similar, like if you're a partner and they're like, hey, you get a budget every month to send our swag out, right? It just has a feeling of like, oh, I feel kind of cool, right? I feel like I kind of have I got some goodies to throw around. I'm like Santa Claus, right? There's something there that's better than just like an equivalent in, let's say, discounts or something like that.
Yeah, Well, I mean, I think that most companies have a budget for that usually too. So it's like, oh, we have like X amount of dollars every quarter for a partner to do something, and so they throw that into a budget form and they will send stuff out. Which what's nice about it is you can track it. So like that, I think that's an important thing. You can see who's had success there and who hasn't. So I think that's we've seen that work pretty well.
One thing that I've loved, which was we actually did it right back at PandaDoc in the very beginning. We didn't realize how well we did it until like after the fact. Is whenever we were doing our first big partnership with HubSpot, and we had our first big inbound, like the big one. It was like the first one we were nobody trying to like take it over, and the second one was like, oh no, we're in the big leagues. Like we're a top partner. We're like the number one partner. What are we gonna do? It's like, well, we got to go bigger. So we made these PandaDoc plus HubSpot shirts with a joint tagline, which was "Love Your Sales," and it was like all because everything that year was around inbound sales, and it was like "Love Your Sales," PandaDoc, give them PandaDoc and HubSpot, and it was this joint branded like you can't really quite call it a joint value proposition, but it was like a joint marketing campaign,
Hmm.
like a true campaign, and that ended up being on landing pages and emails and the swag around it, and people that were both customers they loved it because it had both of their brands represented in a unique way. And one thing I've advised companies to do, and like I've seen in partnerships work really well, is try to distill your joint value proposition into a catchphrase.
Mm.
And if you can do that and you can throw it on a bag or on a hat or on a shirt, all of a sudden your swag game, you just stood out times 10 and people love it because it's just that one little bit extra bit of creativity, that little bit more of that same, sweater or, coffee mug or whatever you were going to do. You're able to bring something unique into that that's only 1 plus 1 equals,
You know
three.
who was super, super early on that? Is like, do you remember like early days of like not really that early, not that long ago, but like I think there was like New Relic did something really well with like their teachers. Like if you were like an engineer, you could go to their site and request like a New Relic shirt, and then like I think it was like someone did like the data nerd shirts. Like everyone and their brother in San Francisco had like
Yeah,
this
yeah,
data
yeah.
nerd shirt. Everyone had those. It doesn't matter. Like you're like, oh, like data nerd, and like I think it was like Data Knives or someone had those. Like everything said that, and like it was one of those things where I don't know where those shirts are now, but like at the time, like you would go to like the meetup event, like FSF New Tech, and everyone would have these shirts on, and you're like, that's kind of random, and like that was almost the exact thing only 15 years ago, like an actual phrase.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's in the consumer world, it's more popular if you really think about it. I mean, the amount of jointly branded and jointly marketed things that exist in the world is it's a tremendous amount, and I feel like the mashup ads are more and more too. Actually, I'm seeing more and more mashup ads like this company and this company bringing you this message.
Yep.
I'm waiting until we have like SaaS branded Happy Meals at McDonald's.
The Salesforce Happy Meal.
This changes like yeah, what items you get. It'll change depending on the day.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. Hey, Brayden, super fun. I love, I mean, I find this space that you're in so interesting. If you guys want to dig in more, check out the Sunday story, but also, Sendoso's in our marketplace on partnerhacker.com. And there's some pretty sweet discounts there for people who are subscribers to the Partner Hacker Daily. So if you're like, hey, we got to get the gifting culture going at our company or with our partners, hey, no better
Hey,
time to start. Sendoso makes it easy.
this is this is why I don't feel guilty about doing like cool stuff like this and like highlighting stuff. It's where I've actually been a customer, like Brayden said, 3 times. So, um,
I wanted to put
love
that
this
in
space.
there, you know.
So
Yeah.
yeah, he threw that there on purpose. That's that social proof, baby.
uh,
Love it.
well, thanks guys for having me on again.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Partner up. Peace out. We'll see you all next time.